Hey, welcome back to the Reading Queens podcast. If this is your first time, you picked a very good time to be here. All of our episodes are amazing. I do have to toot our own horn, but we're doing something special today. We have a guest, Carol Beth Anderson, a young adult fantasy author of all kinds of awesome books, is here with us. So welcome. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited you're here. Clari is very excited. Clari is also here.
Hi.
Yeah, so we're going to talk books, we're going to talk writing, we're just going to get right into it because this is what we're here for. So, Beth, I would like you to introduce yourself to our listeners. Just start off with some basics, about you and your books and stuff.
Sure. As Valia said, I'm Carol Beth Anderson. I go by Beth, always have. And I've got a family, 2 kids. We also have a French exchange student. So we actually have 3 teenagers in the house right now, and a husband and a dog who's sitting right over here next to me, and a bunch of fish. So that's our family. Oh, my daughter has a pet snake too. That's pretty cool. And I've been writing pretty much all my life, but I started writing my first book series almost 5 years ago. I started in April of 2022 or 2017. So in April of 2022, it'll be 5 years. And I'm indie published. And so I've published my first series, which was the Sunblessed trilogy, plus a prequel that goes with that. And then my second series is the Magic Eaters trilogy, plus a prequel that goes with that. So those 8 novels, plus Fairy Fallen, which is the first book of my third series. And I've also done a book that's written for authors called Early Readers Catch the Worms. That's about building alpha, beta, and ARC reader teams. And I've published a book of microfiction, really short little stories that I first wrote on Twitter called The Curio Cabinet. So I've published 11 books in the last few years, and I love writing. It's my happy thing.
Yeah, that's very awesome. We love writing too, since we're authors, and that's why we love this podcast, because we get to talk to other authors who just love this as much as we do. But let's talk about your latest release. It came out in December, correct?
Yes, it came out December 14th. Yep.
Okay, so pretty recent. Let's talk about that. Just give us, it's your newest series, so give us an overview about it, and then we'll talk about what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So it's called Fairy Fallen. The series is called Feathered Fae. So it's the first book of that. And it takes place in a far future, although it's not really sci-fi, but it has kind of some sci-fi underpinnings. So it takes place on a human colony planet in the far future. And kind of the backstory is that back in the 1700s, a good-sized group of fairies left Earth because of persecution and found a way to transport themselves to a colony planet, and they were just the only ones there. And then several hundred years later, humans had reached a high state of technology in the 2500s, but Earth was kind of falling apart. And so they ended up sending out colony ships, and some of them ended up on the same planet as the fairies. And so they've all been there for over 100 years now, fairly small groups of both, like several thousand humans and several hundred fairies. And there's a lot of tension between the two groups. And so the premise of this is you've got this 18-year-old fairy female who gets punished for some stuff that she's done by being declared a fallen fairy. She has to leave the fairy realm and go across the sea, glamour herself as a human, and live with a family that's trying to free the humans from Fae influence. And so she's there as a spy, try to figure out what they're doing. And while she's there, she ends up falling for the 18-year-old guy that she's been sent there to tutor in the Fae language. And so basically you've got them trying to keep their people from killing each other, and also falling for each other, and all the stuff that goes along with a mortal and an immortal, falling in love, or I don't know if it's love yet, falling in whatever they're falling into. So that's the premise
Falling
of the
in
first
lust.
book. Falling in lust for sure, yeah.
That's awesome. That sounds very different than the Fae books that I've read. So I love that about that because I love Fae and it's always really fun to like discover a new take on an old lore. What inspired you to write it?
It is one of the best books I read last
Oh,
year.
there you go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I love world building, and so it was really fun to, I did research on old kind of European, primarily like British Isles fairy lore,
Hmm.
but then kind of decided which stuff was quote unquote true and which stuff was just lore and what the real history was there, and was able to build a different type of magical system and things like that, which is fun. So yeah, what inspired me to write it? I am really inspired by book covers, and so I was finishing up my Magic Eaters series, and was starting to get a little worried because I didn't have any ideas for my next series. I had like little ideas that would pop up, but nothing that was sticking. And so I was spending a lot of time on cover designer Facebook groups, specifically designers who put out pre-made book covers.
Right.
And for listeners who aren't familiar with pre-mades, generally what they are is a cover designer will just design a cover they think would work really well in the market, and they'll sell it to one author. And they might make some changes to it, but generally you're buying the cover as it is. They'll change the title if you want them to, and things like that. And so you're getting like this creativity from this designer, who hopefully really knows what sells in the market. And I just find that really inspiring. So I was looking at these designer websites or Facebook groups, and I was in the group for Darling Cover Designs. It's EJ Darling. She's also an author, and does cover design. And this cover popped up that was actually a fallen angel cover, but I just like fell in absolute love with it as soon as I saw it. And I started having all these ideas about having a fairy who looked more like an angel, just with angel type wings, but was a fairy. And this idea of her being fallen and being cast out of her society. And basically everything just started building in my head as soon as I saw the cover. So I had to have it. So I contacted her, and we were able to make some shifts to the cover to make it a fairy cover. And that's absolutely what inspired the whole series.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because usually, I mean, as indie authors, we get to have a say in what kind of covers we have on our books, which is amazing.
Right.
But it's usually us telling the cover designer like, this is what we see in our heads. So it's really cool that like a cover could do that for you. Like that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It was what I needed to break through that sort of idea block.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that makes sense. What was your favorite part about writing book one?
For one thing, it was one of those books that came together more easily than some books do. And y'all know, like, some books just are hard to write and some books are easier. And you never know going into it which one
Right,
it's going to
right.
be. And it was one where the words just came pretty easily, which was nice. And I still had to do lots and lots of revisions and all of the hard work. But it was just fun to write. And I love romance within novels. This one is what it's romantic fantasy, not fantasy romance. And the difference
Okay,
there is
yeah.
that fantasy is still kind of primary, or at least as big as the romantic part. But I put more romance in it than I really had in my previous books. And I love writing those parts. They're just fun to write. And I feel like those scenes always usually come together really quickly because
Hmm.
it's just fun. It's the stuff that I like reading too. So it was fun feeling like I embraced more of my love of romance in this book than I have in my previous ones.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're romance authors here. Well, I am personally very heavy on romance. So
Yeah,
I always like love that about books.
me too. And I always had it there as like subplots, but it was
Hmm.
it was just really fun to bring it, closer to
Yeah,
front and center,
right.
kind of maybe equal to all the fantasy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to know about you. I'm gonna go now. No, I'm just kidding. Clary, Clary has a few questions that she wanted to ask, and you guys have history. You've met, you said on Twitter, right?
Yeah,
So,
I first met on Twitter through VSS365 through the microfiction, and yeah, I did that for a while. I don't do it very much anymore, but you still do it. Do you still do it every day?
No, I usually get in like one a week. I think I just got a little bit burned out. Like life got really
Yeah.
busy and I got tired of having to come up with those ideas every day. But I haven't pulled off I want it to be something that's still kind of a discipline, but if it becomes a have to, not a want to, then that's no good. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything more about your microfiction, because you have a book of it. And
yeah, I mean, microfiction is just a ton of fun. So, if anybody doesn't know VSS 365 on Twitter, it's this daily writing prompt with one word, and you're challenged to put it into a very short story, or a lot of people do poetry also, that fits in one tweet. And one tweet is 280 characters, which is usually about 50 words. And so I just got really, really into VSS 365 for quite a while, a couple of years, where I was doing it basically every day. And I find microfiction really freeing because, like, I'm probably never going to sit down and write a horror novel. I don't read horror novels. I'm just not into them. But I can write a 50-word horror story, and it's just a fun way to like dabble in genres that I'm not into. And it also just kind of gets your brain going. So at some point when I'd written like 500 little stories, VSS 365 and other writing prompts on Twitter, I thought, okay, I'm going to choose my favorites. I chose 150 of my favorites and put them into the curio cabinet. And I love that little book. I'll always love that little book. In fact, I want to make a second volume. I just haven't had time, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's so cool.
No, it really comes across in the stories that you write on there. Not that I've read it much recently because I'm staying away from Twitter. But yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, your one certainly always stuck out from ones of taking the prompt in a different direction, which I think is something you mentioned about Fairy Fallen, is how you were twisting the expectations of what people think of when they come to Fae. And well, this is the idea of, well, that's what people think about Fae, but yeah, ha ha ha, what do you mean we can't lie? Ha, ha.
Right, exactly.
Of course we can, but we'll just make you think that we can't.
Yeah, and it's really fun to be like, wow, so, if fairies were actually real, we know that like the lore that built up around them has all been written by humans, right? And so you can say, well, not all of that is necessarily quote unquote true, within this world, but parts of it are. And so you kind of go, okay, so this is where this little story came from, and this one was just kind of made up by humans, and and this is what it's fun to actually bring it in and have fairies and humans kind of living alongside each other, and humans have finally learned what fairies really are and who they really are. It's fun.
One thing that I really like about all of your books is your magic systems and how they are so different and unique. Your first series with the midwifery based magic, I mean, midwives are magicians. They are.
They are. They are, and it's so funny to me because I'm like, I didn't know anything about writing a novel when I sat down to write that series. I look back now and I'm like, I can't believe I wrote a young adult series that has like a childbirth based magic system, which doesn't make sense for young adults, but it's really cool. Like I still kind of love that because like magical midwives that are like heroes, that's a lot of fun. So it's funny, like I went into writing thinking I didn't like doing world building, and at some point I realized that I was doing just a ton of world building. So apparently I do like it. It's just a lot of work, but like even when I was going to do Fairy Fallen, I was like, okay, I'm doing something that's based on like existing lore, right? But as I was planning it, I realized I still had somehow created this entirely new magical system. So apparently that's just what my brain is like wired to do. And one of the new things I'm working on that I'm sure we'll talk about is that I think I'm actually going to escape without doing a lot of world building for it, but we'll see, because I'm not sure if that's possible.
How much do you plan and how much do you pants it as you go through?
Oh, so I'm in this really big kind of transition place there. I had started pantsing my first novel, but as I was writing it, I was reading up on story structure and ended up going back and kind of changing. Like I ended up doing some outlining. Sorry, that was my dog shaking his collar. So I ended up doing with my first story, I ended up doing some outlining as I went. Like I was part of the way through and ended up kind of trying to outline the rest. And then I had to like go back and make pretty major structural changes to make it work. Because I didn't know what I was doing. But after that, I'd been doing a lot of reading on story structure and really bought into the whole idea of making an outline. And so I wanted to be a plotter. But what I found was that I really turned into a plantser. So, you've got
Mm-hmm.
plotters, you've got pantsers who fly by the seat of their pants, and plantsers are more like people who do some planning in advance, but you have a lot of changes along the way. So most of my books, what I've done is I've done a basic outline to start with, where you've got kind of all the basic plot points, some of the little in-between stuff, but without getting into a lot of details. And then I would do a lot of world building beforehand also, so that I had like details about the society and the magical system, but the actual plot was pretty bare bones. And then I would do a chapter by chapter outline of the first quarter of the book. And I would go through and write that, and things would invariably change some along the way. And so I wouldn't outline the second quarter until I was done with I wouldn't do like that detailed outline until I was done with the first quarter. So that's what I've done. That's what I did for Fairy Fallen, and what I'm doing for Fairy Found, which is the sequel I'm working on. In fact, I'm just about to finish drafting the first quarter, so I'm gonna have to sit down and outline the second quarter. But I'm also working on, actually, I need to ask you guys, when does this podcast go live?
Wednesday.
Okay. I can't tell too many details about this because I won't have announced this by Wednesday, but I'm working on a serial story that I'm super excited about, that is a fairy tale retelling with a really fun kind of twist. And I've never published a serial story before. So I'm going to publish it on Kindle Vella, which is Kindle's serial platform, and also on Patreon. And I've decided to publish it as I go. So I've got, beta readers who are going to review all that stuff for me, but it's pretty scary because I do pretty heavy revisions. And so I went, okay, I have to have a really, really solid idea of what's happening in this book going into it, because once episode 3 is published, I can't go back and change it. If something in episode 10 needed something in episode 3 to be changed, I can't change it. So I ended up doing kind of a combination of what they call the snowflake method of plotting, which is really kind of a cool concept. And then I also took this 40 chapter plot outline kind of, it encourages you to write like one sentence for each of 40 chapters in the book, and it follows traditional story structure. And that was put out by the guys who are part of Sterling and Stone, which is they used to do like a big conference and stuff. Anyways, they've just put out a lot of stuff for indie authors. And so once I had kind of character stuff in place, my basic plot stuff in place, I went through with this 40 chapter, 40 sentence plot outline. And I took each chapter and broke it into 3 episodes. And so I ended up with almost like, I think it was 119 little sentences, so that I could have that many very short, like, 600 to 800 word, basically, episodes. And so I've got like by far the most detailed outline I've ever had, like over 100 points. Like I've never had anywhere close to that going into it. And it was really hard. And I felt like it was stretching my brain in very uncomfortable ways, because I'm not used to having to figure all this stuff out in advance. But man, it felt like amazing finishing this and going, I actually know what's happening here. And now that I've started drafting it, I've got like 6 episodes written. It's been so cool to be like, okay, I know what I need to write next. I know what I need to write next. I know what I need to write next. So I think that's probably going to be my new system, which is very different than I've done before. And I might actually finally be able to call myself a plotter, which is kind of what I've always wanted to do. And I didn't think I could do it, and maybe I can. So that was a long answer, but yeah, I'm a reforming plantser turning into a plotter.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because we have a couple of queens who write Vela stories as well. And I know for a fact, one of the queens, she's doing it completely different. She's not really planning it out. Well, she always plans out her books, but she's letting like the Vela be kind of more of like a discovery writing for her. So it's just like super interesting that it's like a serialized fiction just kind of pushes you past like your norm.
It does. And I think that's a super cool and incredibly scary idea of actually fancying a Vela story. But it can turn out really cool, and you have some real freedom there. But yeah, either way, it's stretching you past what you're used to, which is
that's
fun.
Awesome. Also, fairy tale retelling, big fan. Okay.
Oh, I wish I could tell you more. So let me tell you one thing about it, is that this is another one totally inspired by a cover. Because I had been thinking maybe I'll do fairy tale retellings at some point. I had done like a short one for the Villainous anthology, which is an anthology of fairy tale retellings, all from the points of view of villains. It's a charity anthology, really fun. So I really loved the story I wrote for that one, and thought maybe I'll get into these. And then Christian Benchalon, who's this fantastic cover designer, he had created this cover that was for a fairy tale retelling, and I'm like trying not to say anything that I haven't announced yet, for a fairy tale retelling, and I fell in love with it, or I thought it was really great, but I didn't pounce on it. And a few months later, the person who bought it, with his permission, posted it again saying, I'm getting rid of a bunch of covers I'm not going to use. And by then it was like the right timing for me. So I snatched it up, and I'm even keeping like the title that he came up with. And that's what kind of got me going with thinking through what this one is turning into.
That's awesome. I'm like so curious now. I just started my fairy tale retelling stuff. So like everything fairy tale retelling, I'm like, give me. So that's really cool.
So I'm actually planning on doing the first episodes next Monday, the 31st. So it's coming, it's really soon, but I'm not actually going to do like the public announcement until that day. Launches, that's different for me, because with my books, I'm used to like long pre-orders and stuff, but I figured, let's just like do some big time launch buzz. But when we turn off the recording, I'll tell you more about it if you want me
perfect. That's awesome.
Cool. You also record your own audiobooks.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. So
how does that go? Do you like how they come out? Would you recommend other people doing it?
Yeah, wow,
that is feedback.
That's a big topic. So I'll take that question first about whether you recommend other people doing it first. And generally I don't. It's a lot of work, especially if you're doing your own editing and mastering. It's really time consuming. It is a steep learning curve unless you're used to editing voice work. And even then, the editing for an audiobook just has to be on a very different level than like most people are doing for podcasts and things, because audio listeners are super, super picky. And it's just meant to be like highly produced in a way that live stuff like this is not. And plus, like, you kind of need to have a voice and some sort of performance skill that you can bring into that. So I would say in general, no. There are so many good options for getting your book turned into an audiobook that for most people, it's not worth the time. It may not be worth the time for me, but it's another creative effort and I enjoy it. And so to me, it's worth doing. So I decided to do it because my college degree is in theater. In fact, I've just recently gotten like really heavily involved in community theater after taking a long, long hiatus of over a decade. And so I already had that performance side of it. So for me, I was willing to tackle the technical side, and I enjoy learning new things. And so it felt like a good fit for me. And I have generally gotten really good reviews, and people in general like my performance style. Now, I would say audio listeners are in some ways more particular than book readers, just because a lot of us have a lot of very specific preferences about what style we like for narrators. And so you have to take all of it, with a grain of salt, but mostly people have really liked my narration style. And so it's worked well. And my box audio sets, like my box sets where I take, after it's been out for a while, I take the whole series and put it into an ebook and audio box sets. Those actually sell really pretty well compared to like the individual books. And it's just a really nice additional stream of income. So I am big on, if you can find a way to do audiobooks, I think it can be a really great thing to add. But I think for most people, unless you really, really want to take on a massive project with a really big learning curve and you feel like you've got some skill that goes into that category, for most people, it's not worth it to do your own.
That makes sense. I would not want to do my own.
But I think it's really fun.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have got back into amateur dramatics. Do you feel that your acting helps you write?
I don't know. That's a good question. I've actually felt more that my writing has helped with acting, because character building, like what I've learned about building characters, things like, finding the wound in your character's past that has given them their big faults, right? I don't know that that's something that wasn't really a concept I was familiar with until I was writing, and I've been able to bring that into theater. So yeah, I think it's been more the other way around, but in general, they're both just creative and they feed my soul. And for me, I'm not interested in doing professional theater. That's just not something I want to get into. And so I consider my writing to be a business, which means I have to, take it really seriously. And that can be stressful at times. And I don't make a ton of money at it, but I want to be profitable, and it's really freeing having a creative outlet that is not my job. And that's just purely fun. And I take it really seriously too. And I'm committed to it, but it's really nice not being like, okay, what are the theaters that will pay me? And how far am I going to have to drive to get to those? And can I get into their shows? And just being an amateur is a blast.
That's a really good point, because I feel like for a lot of us, writing has started as a hobby and that creative outlet that we loved so much. But then when we want to take it seriously, now we're like, we don't have a hobby anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's a
else.
job, and it's something we still love, but yeah, it's a different mindset once you start treating it like a job. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really cool that you can have that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, was there anything else that you had to ask, Clari?
I think that was
that
my,
it?
all
Okay.
my questions. Other than what's happening next in Fairy Found, because I want to know. That's a huge cliffhanger at the end.
I know. That's the biggest
I don't expect you to answer.
And it's funny because I'm really careful with cliffhangers. Like most of my series books do have what I call soft cliffhangers, where you're wrapping up the major story. And so it's not a hard cliffhanger where you don't even wrap up the conflict, right? Mm-hmm. You wrap up the conflict, but you've got this soft cliffhanger that leads to the next story, which is what I did in Fairy Fallen. But that it's a much bigger soft cliffhanger than I've done before. And nobody seems genuinely mad about it, but everybody's like, I really have to wait until November. What are you doing to me? And I'm like, I'm sorry, my life has gotten really busy. But I can assure you that the big question that is left open at the end of the epilogue, which I can't say anything about because it would be very spoilerish, but that big question is answered in the first 3 or 4 chapters. So once it comes out, you won't have to read long to get that answer.
Okay.
Read the whole book and then here's
and then
the
find out it's still not there.
Yeah,
no, that's not going to happen.
That's helpful to your readers, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And to me.
You're one of her readers, so there you go. No, I have your books on my Kindle. I haven't been reading anything. The girls know this. I say this every single time we do podcasts. When I'm in a deadline, recently I haven't been reading. So how does that work for you? Do you read when you write, or do you take a break, or do you read different genre? What does your reading look like when you're drafting?
Yeah, so I'm a daily reader. It's part of my bedtime routine. And so and lately I have been really busy. Doing theater means I'm gone a lot at night, and so I don't have as much time at night as usual. So sometimes I'm even just reading an episode on Kindle Vella, but I'm always reading something. So Rebecca F. Kinney, I'm addicted to her stories. She's one of my favorite indie authors, and she's writing something on Kindle Vella that I've been reading lately. And but I do tend to read mostly in my, in some sort of fantasy genre, usually with some sort of romance involved. But I branch out some. I just read a dystopian YA novel that was fun. I'm also usually reading something that is nonfiction that's some sort of self-help, or something that's making me think about deep things like parenting and faith and all of the deep thought stuff. So right now I'm reading something that my wonderful therapist, I'm a big believer in therapy, my wonderful therapist recommended, which is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And I tend to read those nonfiction books really slowly. They're my morning reading over coffee, but I don't read them every day. So it'll take me months to get through it. But wonderful book about compassion and vulnerability and learning to accept imperfection, which is something I'm not naturally terribly good at. So that's really good. And then I'm actually the full novel that I'm reading right now is also Rebecca F. Kinney. So I'm getting a lot of her stuff right now because I'm also reading her Vella, but I'm reading her Apollo novel, which is just really fun. It's she's putting out this series of like fae novels, and Apollo is not really fae, but it's all tied in with that, you know. So some of them are Olympians and some of them are fae, but it's all this world she's created, and it's just fun fantasy romance, and it's light and quick and easy stuff to read, and but she always has some really cool character depth in there, even though you're reading through it really fast. So so that's what I'm reading right now.
Love it. That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all we have for you. We can keep talking. I have so many questions about so much. No, but thank you so much for being here and just, you know, for talking about your stuff, your books, and your life. We love doing these author episodes because, like I said before, like, we're authors, so it's really fun to hang out with other like-minded individuals. But also, I love learning how different we all are. You know, how our brains just work so differently.
Definitely, all our different processes. Yeah. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we are gonna wrap it up here, but I will link everything of your books and your Instagram, everything in the little description box. But you are on Instagram as C Beth Anderson. And the latest release will be linked as well, because that's what I do. It's my job. No.
Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you so much. And dear listeners, before you go, please give us a follow on your favorite podcast platform and on Instagram at Reading Queens Pod. And then tell your friends to come hang out with us because we're doing really fun episodes. So I think you should be here. But until next time, I guess. I can't talk anymore. Bye.
Bye.